Core Conversations highlights musicians, artists, creatives, community leaders, and innovators by giving them a platform to tell their stories, showcase their projects, and champion their causes in the region. This series is focused on, but not limited to, the underrepresented voices and people of color in the Kansas City urban core. Core Conversations is produced and recorded by One Kansas City Radio and broadcast at 100.1 FM KONN-LP. We support the beauty of diversity in our program and hope you enjoy the conversation.
This is UJ, and you're listening to Core Conversations on One Kansas City Radio. I'm here today with Enrique Chi from the band Making Movies, right here from Kansas City. How are you doing today?
I'm doing all right. It is a weird time to be a band.
Weird time for sure.
And I think it's a weird time to be a human being, but with the coronavirus thing. But we were just talking off air about how our whole world
upside down.
Is upside down.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit scary to be honest, but I think, human beings are resilient. We can figure this out.
Right. Yeah. We'll get through this somehow. Right. So you grew up in the Kansas City area in Lee Summit, right?
I did. I grew up the first 6 years of my life. I grew up in Panama, so that's where I was born. And then my family moved to Kansas City when I was young. We were supposed to be here for 4 years. And they heard about an ESL teacher in Lee Summit, Missouri. And Nola Maggedy was an amazing ESL teacher, enough so that there were murmurings about her around the town.
Okay.
So my parents, not knowing anything of this town, landed in Lee Summit so that I could go take ESL with Miss Maggedy, who, bless her heart, became one of the biggest influences in my young life.
That's awesome. That's great to hear. So you part of an immigrant family that came here when you were really young and you were learning English, but eventually you kind of found your footing, right? What was it like kind of growing up in Kansas City at that time?
Well, I think that being out in Lee Summit was very isolating. The immigrants in that community, that a lot of them had heard of this woman, and she went above and beyond being an ESL teacher in that she would get involved in the immigrant families' lives. Like if they needed to fill out a tax form, she would be at the Cambodian family's home helping them go through the tax form, way outside of what a ESL teacher at an elementary school really is supposed to be doing. So I can't emphasize or overemphasize the amount of respect I have for that woman and the work that her and her family did. And so there was this crop of immigrant kids in Lee Summit, and we would literally all get picked up by the short bus, the bus for mentally handicapped kids.
Yeah.
And I went to elementary school in the short bus, my whole elementary school career in Lee Summit. And growing up out there, since there was only one immigrant kid from another part of the world and another immigrant young woman from this part of the world, I didn't really realize that there was a vibrant Latino community in Kansas City until I became a teenager and started to explore the city on my own and make connections. And really through music and connecting with Juan Carlos's family, this is after graduating high school, that's when I realized, oh my God, there's actually this huge population and I'm not alone in that. And I think that there's a downside to that isolation, of feeling like you're the weirdest kid in the world. You're the only person from Panama anybody's ever met. When they meet you, they're like, Panama, where is that from? What part of Mexico is that?
Right.
And if you're lucky if somebody has a frame of reference of the Panama Canal. But I can't tell you how many times I've been asked, Panama, where is that?
What
part of Mexico is that?
Ooh.
Yeah, a lot.
Yeah.
So there's obviously that's not a pleasant experience, but there's this upside that came from it. And one upside is that I dove into music. Music was my window to the world. I would listen to music from Panama, people like Ruben Blades, who, when he wrote about Central American life and Panamanian, he's a Panamanian, I could, smell my hometown in his song, if that makes sense. And so that made music became so important to me as a way to remember that the world's much bigger than this little tiny suburb in Kansas City, where my universe has become focused upon in the immediate. And then the other blessing is that if I was in New York City, I think I would want to hang out with Caribbean Latinos. Maybe there's not enough Panamanians to just have a tribe of only Panamanians, but I'd be like, oh, people that are more like me. They're like Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Panamanians, very that Afro-Caribbean kind of flavor. And I would stick inside my little window, my little wheelhouse.
I see.
But in a town like Kansas City, there's just not enough of us. So anytime I met anybody that spoke Spanish or had Latino culture, I would gravitate towards them. And then I'd, with a genuine curiosity, oh, what do you all do?
Right.
What is your music like? What is your food like? And in that, the differences kind of fade away and the similarities rise. And my best friends are Chicanos, Puerto Ricans, Venezolanos, Peruvians, like, and Panamanians, obviously. But I feel like the blessing inside of that kind of challenge was that I would have stayed inside a lane. You know, had I grown up in Panama or had I grown up in Miami or LA or New York,
sure,
I would have just stayed in a lane. And by being here, it forced me to want to meet diverse Latino people and also American folks as well.
Right, branching out, kind of seeing what else is out there, and then kind of incorporating all that stuff into what you create as like an artist too.
Exactly, a huge influence on my musical work, and I didn't realize it would become so. But on every Making Movies record, there's a Venezuelan cuatro because my cousins are from Venezuela, and I've fallen in love with that music. There's a Puerto Rican cuatro, which totally different instruments, just happen to have the same name. There's Panamanian folkloric guitars. There's some Afro-Mexican influence rhythm, huapango rhythm has creeped its way into our sound, and I think that is definitely a byproduct of that kind of feeling like an isolated immigrant and wanting to just connect with other folks who had similar experiences.
Right. Yeah. That's so cool. I know you talk a lot about music as being more than like knowing how to play an instrument and playing the right notes and making something that sounds good. It's also about storytelling and about sharing your experiences and kind of being vulnerable in doing that kind of storytelling. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. And I think that ties into, which I'm sure we'll segue into my community work through the not-for-profit, the foundation that we started, Art as Mentorship. But I believe that, so music as a commodity, recorded music, what we're doing here, recording a podcast, that's 100 years old. We've found bone flutes in caves in Europe from the first time that we know of in the current understanding of human history. Humans migrate out of Africa. And they run into Neanderthals. At some point, the Neanderthal population fades away. Homo sapiens, modern humans are left, which is actually integrated with the Neanderthal DNA and stuff. Well, around 40,000 years ago, we find these bone flutes. Archaeologists even say, and I was watching like some really nerdy archaeology YouTube stuff, and at the end of it, I'm sitting here like kind of like dazed, you know, just like not paying that much attention, but kind of letting it wash over me. And it ends with this like scientist, this old white dude with a really white beard, and he's holding the flute, and he's like, I recreate archaeological artifacts that are found from thousands of years ago, and he has it all whittled together, and then he goes, I recreated this using the same tools they had in that time. He plays a little scale on it, a little pentatonic scale, and he goes, I believe that this is as much of a reason why humans survived as anything else, because in these first time human beings encounter winters and have to hole up in a cave, music becomes a way to express and let out these kind of emotions that you have. And in that moment, I was like, oh my God, that's brilliant.
Yeah. That's super cool. I know I'm a big history person, and I really love the idea that some of the oldest things that we can find that tell us about humanity is artwork, and that art was just as important as eating and sleeping and all of these things, that like literally it's like part of our DNA.
It literally is. And I feel that music has this amazing ability to reopen those windows or those portals in your mind. This is not science. Like what I referenced about the flute these are scientists talking. That's not a musician. That's not somebody trying to raise money for the arts.
Right.
That was a scientist just being like, I think this flute is why humans survived.
Right.
Whoa, that's powerful. Well, so I'm transitioning into just my opinions. But like in my opinion, and from what I've experienced as a musician, when you get a group of people together, when we're playing to 5,000 people in Panama at the Macro Fest, and we're playing some of these rhythms, there's a reason why folks who never even heard of our band can just instantly connect to it, and why transport that to Kansas City, and I can play the same rhythm. I think that potentially there's musical DNA, if that makes sense, or musical fabrics that are so old we can all remember them.
Yeah.
Maybe not all of us, but maybe a big enough chunk for the music to feel universal in a way. And I think that is the most fascinating part about making music, is that you can kind of tap into this. Like, I'll tell you a story. So my mom, her father, when he was a teenager, he worked in a merchant ship, and he traveled around the Caribbean first, ended up going to Europe, and then spent a lot of time in Cuba. Fell in love with Cuban music. Came home with Cuban records. My mom grew up with her dad listening to Cuban music. He wasn't alive very long when I was born, plus I moved to the U.S., so I didn't have a very close relationship with him before he passed. As an adult, he passed when I was like 8 years old, maybe. As an adult, I fall in love with Cuban music. And at a gig, in the early days of making movies, we cover an old Cuban song, Cuarto de Tula. Or maybe it might have been Chan Chan, one of the two songs. And we're covering this old Cuban song, and my mom, she goes, "Where did you learn that song?" It's like, I've just been obsessing over Cuban music. Like, I went down the rabbit hole of Buena Vista Social Club that then led me to Compay Segundo and Arsenio Rodriguez and all the classic Cuban artists. And she's like, "That's so weird because your grandpa loved that song."
Wow.
And I don't think you ever heard it from him. I'm like, "Yeah, I love that song too." And so why did I love that?
Yeah.
If I never met him before? Like, we all understand it from other different kinds of affinities. Like, like you see like a grandchild or a great grandchild and be like, who loves strawberries, and they're too young to be making a conscious decision to love strawberries.
Yeah.
And then there's like someone in the family who's like, that reminds me of our great aunt so and so. She was obsessed with strawberries. She would make strawberry pie. She'd make right?
Yeah, yeah.
And your 3-year-old relative, and I feel that music is very much that way, where we inherit these traditions and affinities, and that when you hear certain music, you can unlock those things and learn a lot about yourself.
Yeah, that's really incredible. That's so cool. I definitely do get that. I know my parents, they immigrated from Liberia in the 80s, and so I grew up listening to some of that music, but for like 10 years, I kind of just like pushed it aside, like, that's not me. But then, like, now that I'm in my 20s, I'm hearing Afrobeats music, I'm hearing music that's inspired by those ideas, and I just like, it's like I'm not in control of like whether or not I like it. Like, it's part of me, I like it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. And that's it. And I think that there's a lot of beauty to that, and there's a power to that, because we have been so often told the wrong story, the wrong narrative about human history. Not that everything's been a lie. It's just that we're often told the narrative that serves
a certain group of people.
The people in power and the people who can make money off of you as a consumer. We're told the narrative that makes you a better consumer,
right,
for them. And music lives outside of that. I think of this like you said, you can't even control liking it. You know, you're like, I just like this. I don't know if I'm supposed to, but I really like this. I feel that with making movies fans who are like, this is weird. I've never heard anything like this.
Yeah.
And they're like, I don't know why I like this, but I like this. And then they can lean in, get a little closer, and then we can start speaking about the issues that maybe they've been ignoring or been ignorant to. And because they're having a good time and they feel emotionally connected to what we're doing, then all of a sudden the message can go in more subtle than a news article or a protester screaming in their face.
Right.
There's a huge power to using that. Like, you draw people in, and then you can speak to them.
Can speak to them. Yeah, that's a really cool way of to talk about that idea. Because it can be hard to reach people, but music is really one of those things that everyone's got a frame of reference for, and you can meet everyone somewhere when it comes to music in that way. It's really cool. So I want to talk a little bit about, or give you a chance to talk a little bit about the work that you do in Kansas City with your summer music camp. Can you tell us a little bit about how you started getting into that work and kind of where you are now, and then maybe even where you envision this kind of going in the future?
Absolutely. So that work started right here in this neighborhood in the historic Northeast. I met. So if we go backtrack to